me, there's a general consensus that says that the foods that are out there and that we eat maybe aren't the most healthy. And if they're consumed long enough or in a high enough quantity, I think there's a general agreement that they can cause health issues. But what about the water? There's food to drink and bottled water. And so tonight we are going to dig into what's going on with our water tonight on Thursday Night Live. Well, happy almost 4th of July. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, your host of Thursday Night Live, and I'm so glad that you tuned into the show today. So earlier in 2026, federal agencies made a big announcement about testing for impurities on our. And what they found was that there were residue trace amounts of pharmaceuticals in the water, as well as microplastics. But what's interesting is when it came time to identify what they were going to be looking for and testing for, they backed out of that whole conversation because they said there wasn't any standard testing that they could do for those two items in particular. And so that's being held off for another 5 years. So what's gotten them all riled up? So we're going to start with pharmaceuticals because, because that's where we're going to start. And I think, all right, hang on, give me a lozenge. I can just tell. All right, that was kind of gross, huh? Okay. So let's start with pharmaceuticals. So think about it. And I don't mean to be gross here and kind of graphic, but think about it. So you take a pill and your body ingests a certain amount of it, but not necessarily 100% of the medication that you've taken. And the remainder is flushed down the toilet. And so that water goes to the treatment plants where they're very good at taking the solid waste out of the water. They are very good at getting rid of the bacteria, but they're not very good at getting rid of the water-soluble drugs that have been passed from your body into the water supply. And I'm assuming, because pharmaceuticals have been around for a long time, that this issue has been going on for a while. However, it seems like these days everyone is on some kind of a prescription, if not 4 or 5. It is identified that I think it's 6 out of 10 people take 4 to 5 prescription medications a day. 6 out of 10. That's a lot of medication for a lot of people. So when we're talking about the water that you're drinking, this water, talking about tap water and potentially well water, contained trace amounts of drugs. And so these drugs include antibiotics, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, high blood pressure medications, and painkillers like ibuprofen. And that was just a brief list that I found. And I'm sure that there's many, many more that are in there that were not identified in my little bit of research. Now, what was interesting is that if you think you're being good and I never drink tap water and I always am buying cases of bottled water and that's all I drink, those same trace amounts are also found in purified waters like Aquafina or Dasani, or other, your basic bottled water. And the way it was described is like, yeah, they take the water, they maybe run it through a little bit of a filter, and then they bottle it. So you're really not getting anything of a higher quality per se than what you would get drinking the water out of your tap. So one of the things that they've started noticing is that they're seeing disruptions in the wildlife. And because, if you're a fish or a little frog and you're taking in that water, those trace amounts might be enough to trigger some kind of a reaction in you. And perhaps, I did not see any evidence of this, but I didn't look either. Perhaps this is what triggered this investigation into trace amounts of pharmaceuticals in the water, because they are starting to see actual physiological and behavioral changes in wildlife. That's a little scary. But, ask the environmental agencies and they say, oh, it's okay. It's just a trace amount and it's too low to affect your health. And what they were saying is that if you are an 80-year-old person and we're drinking like a liter of water a day, that you would only ever ingest like 1 pill worth of medication. We're going to kind of come back to that in a second. But there's lots of unknowns. There are a lot of unknowns. What happens when we consume hundreds of different kinds of trace compounds? Because they're saying, well, it would amount to 1 pill, but is it 1 ibuprofen? Is it 1 mood stabilizer? Is it 1 antibiotic? I mean, it's not like one of all of this trace stuff together. It is one of any one of those trace things. And so how much are you actually consuming through these trace compounds? We already have this tradition, where the food that we eat is under a very, very toxic load. When you get a box of something or a bottle of something and you look at the label and you can't pronounce the words that are in those foods because they're all chemically based, getting in trace amounts of pharmaceuticals in your water just adds to that toxic load that's already going on. Kind of scary. It's up there with those forever chemicals that I talked about the other day that are actually in leafy greens like spinach and kale. And it's like, okay, don't eat the meat because there's too many hormones, and don't eat this because of this. And, there's this push for you to eat green and eat fruits and vegetables, but they have their own issues going on in them as well. So I don't know what's safe, don't eat. That's pretty much it. But anyway, let's now shift gears and talk about microplastics. So this is a concept that's kind of new to me. I've kind of heard people talk about it, but never really paid much attention to it. So microplastics, when they're talking about microplastics, they're talking about tiny, tiny particles of plastic that can get into things. And so when you're talking about a microparticle or microplastics, and then there's another category that's even smaller, but we're just going to stick with microplastics as a generic term. We are talking about something on the large side being the size of a sesame seed, and on the small side, the size of a virus. Okay, that is microscopic. I mean, we're talking teeny, tiny, tiny thing. So you would think, like when you're eating corn, that if you ate these microplastics, they would go in and come out unadulterated. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. So apparently, and this makes sense, plastics don't dissolve. And what they have been finding is that when you are ingesting, especially those little teeny tiny particles that are the size of a virus, that they can cross the intestinal lining. So, for example, if somebody has leaky gut syndrome, what that suggests is that food particles, so little teeny tiny food particles, can get through the intestinal lining, and actually it ends up in your bloodstream. And then you end up with all kinds of weird chronic issues going on. Well, apparently these microplastics can do the same exact thing. They have been found in every part of the body, including the brain. And when you can find things in the brain, it becomes, to me, a bit more concerning. So there's something that's called the blood-brain barrier, and it is tissue that only allows certain things to enter the brain cavity. And so there are a lot of herbs and supplements and even medications that do not cross the blood-brain barrier. I mean, it's very specialized tissue. But apparently, these microplastics can do that. Now, how much that is, I don't have quantifications. It's just the fact that they can, that I think it's important. What they're also finding is that these microplastics can cause physical damage, because they're plastic and that they have rough edges, that they can create inflammation and irritation in the tissue, because they're like little chunks of sand and plastic that's in your body. But this was a scarier piece, is that they can also, so these plastics, just by their nature, can also absorb heavy metals, pesticides, and bacteria. Now, these some of the chemicals that are used to create these plastics, including BPA, don't ask me what that is, BPA, are also endocrine disruptors. And so what that means is that it can mimic hormones like estrogen and cause your body to become more feminine if you're a man. I mean, organs like the thyroid, the adrenal glands, our sex hormones are all hormone driven. Our thyroid are all hormone driven. And so if there are things that are interfering with our endocrine system, just think of the variety of illnesses that could be happening to us at any given time, or with enough exposure to these microplastics could develop over time, that obviously medication is not going to fix, because the organ isn't damaged. I mean, it's damaged, but it's not damaged from an organic thing. It's damaged because you have a bunch of plastic in it. Okay. So this was the even weirder part. So one of the biggest offenders, you're going to love this, one of the biggest offenders of incorporating microplastics was bottled water. So you would think it's good for you. It's like, no, I don't drink tap water. That stuff's nasty. I only drink bottled water. Me and Aquafina, we're great friends. Apparently, that's one of the worst. So again, kind of don't know what to do. Mostly, I just want to raise your awareness about what is going on with our food supply, because it's just being put out there and it's just being presented. And, all of these things should have warning labels on them to let us know, like, you are consuming this thing that is not really good for your health, even though you're consuming it trying to be and maintain health for yourself. And I think we should, this whole thing, raising your awareness, maybe it will be an opportunity for you to put some pressure on the food industry, maybe stop eating or consuming some of those foods for your health, so that we can make changes, so that we can have and eat and consume foods that are going to build up our bodies and not tear it apart. And that's our thing for this Thursday night. So if you enjoyed that, and you want to follow me on some of my my social media, you can. Why does it do this to me? There we go. There we go. So this is some of the places you can find me. You can find me on YouTube, Substack. I post a lot on Substack, Twitter, and Rumble. And please like and subscribe. If you see one of my videos, give it a thumbs up. I would just love it. It really helps me in the algorithm and gets my word and my message out to more and more people. Thank you. Okay, so I am ready to turn the show over. So before I do, I'm just going to share the rules of engagement. Okay. And so if you want a reading, okay, well, actually, stop it. Stop. If you want to get a reading, all you need to do is go in the chat room. And, you know, the best way to get into the chat room is going to my YouTube channel, which is Just Energy Radio. Or are you? Just Energy Radio on YouTube, and click the live button and get into the chat. And when you are there, all you need to do is say, hey, Dr. Rita, your hair looks amazing. And lie to me, even if it doesn't. Yeah, that's the best way. And then say, I would like to get a reading. And then give me a number between 1 and 3. And that's how many times I will shuffle the cards on your behalf. And then you get the reading. Bam, it's that easy.